They refused to treat her wounds, claiming she wasn't worth wasting medical supplies on. They said real soldiers needed saving first, that she could wait, and she'd probably bleed out anyway. So they left her torn open, barely conscious, slumped behind an armored truck as the last chopper lifted off without her. But what they didn't realize, what left every medic frozen when her voice crackled over the radio hours later, was that the woman they abandoned to die was a Navy SEAL. She didn't just survive. She stitched herself up, completed the mission all alone, and rescued the very convoy that had left her behind. But before we dive into how she fought her way through a deadly kill zone and reclaimed the mission they had given up on, drop a comment below telling us where in the world you're watching from. Hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Stay locked in, because this story is all about what happens when you underestimate the wrong soldier. The sun wasn't even up yet when the corridor lit up like hell itself. What had been designated as a cleared NATO transit lane, Sector Echo 7, was suddenly a graveyard of shredded vehicles, overturned troop carriers, and screaming voices buried under dirt and shrapnel. The air was thick with pulverized stone, burning oil, and panic. Mortar fire arced down in slow, echoing pulses that made every heart in the valley stutter. Radios crackled in a dozen languages, but none of them said what anyone needed to hear. That help was coming. Petty Officer First Class Megan Brooks staggered down the incline with blood running freely from her side. A jagged line of shrapnel had torn through her lower abdomen and thigh. Her left leg dragged with every step. Her right arm held fast to the unconscious body of a private she'd pulled from the burning wreckage of a Stryker vehicle 20 meters up the ridge. She hadn't looked at his name tape. There hadn't been time. Up ahead, the triage point was pure chaos. Stretchers were laid out on canvas tarps. Medics sprinted between the wounded, trying to triage with glances and gut instincts. There were no protocols here, just blood and noise and not enough hands. As Megan stumbled toward them, her boots slipping in ash and gravel, two medics broke off and ran toward her. They didn't help her. They peeled the private off her shoulders and rushed him to a line of stretchers without so much as looking her in the eye. She stood there swaying, blood soaked through her camo blouse. Her breathing was ragged. One of the medics glanced back. "She's standing. Not critical," another muttered. "We can't waste supplies on every injured woman who tags along." Someone else barked. "We've got real fighters to treat. Move her out of the lane." Nobody asked who she was. Nobody saw the battered trauma kit clipped to her belt. Nobody noticed the gold trident patch barely visible under the mud and blood smeared across her uniform. They just saw a bleeding woman and assumed she didn't belong. Megan tried to speak. The words caught in her throat and then her knees buckled. She collapsed beside a blown-out Humvee, her hands clutching her stomach, her vision blurred at the edges. The medics had already turned away. Dust blew over her as a Black Hawk lifted off with a roar. No one looked back. On the ground, a single dog tag caught the morning light as it slid from her collar, dragging a thin chain across her chest. The blood had cleared just enough to reveal what none of them had seen, an old faint trident scar inked just above her heart. But by then there was no one left to notice. The gravel bit into her shoulder as she rolled onto her side, blinking against the glare of smoke-washed sunrise. Her fingers dug into the ground instinctively, searching for leverage, something solid, anything to pull against. Every movement sent a wave of heat through her body that blurred the edges of her vision. She managed to get one knee under her, then the other. Her abdomen screamed. Blood pulsed beneath the pressure of her elbow. Still, she crawled forward. The edge of the triage zone was 30 feet away. She made it 10. Boots stopped in front of her face. "Ma'am," a voice said sharply. "You can't be here." She lifted her head. A young army medic, barely 20 probably, stared down at her like she was in the way, which technically she was. She tried to speak but coughed instead, tasting iron. "You're conscious," he added flatly. "That means you're not priority." She opened her mouth again. Another voice cut her off. "She's not critical. She's talking." A second medic stepped in behind the first, gesturing impatiently. "Clear the evac lane. Move her behind the vehicle. We've got inbound litters coming now." She rasped. "Yeah," the younger one muttered. "We all need something." Together they half-dragged, half-rolled her behind the burned-out husk of an MRAP and left her in the dirt. She tried to call after them. Her voice cracked into nothing. They were already gone. She lay there, the shadows of boots and stretchers moving past in waves. A colonel barked orders. A Marine shouted for more tourniquets. Somewhere across the valley, Gunfire started again. Short bursts, controlled, then cut off. Megan forced herself to sit up. Her blouse clung to her side. She peeled it back just enough to see blood pooling again. The field dressing she'd pressed in had failed. She needed a second tourniquet, fluid resupply, antibiotics if she wanted to stay conscious through the next hour. From the other side of the vehicle, she heard the logistics captain's voice. Save the good kits for the guys who will actually get back in the fight. Copy that. She'll probably pass out soon anyway. She leaned her head back against the warm metal. Dust from the rotor wash of the next chopper rained down in a gray curtain. Stretchers loaded, screams quieted. And then the final rotors, the last helicopter, pulled up into the haze and vanished. They'd evacuated everyone except her. Silence fell like a second detonation. No more boots, no more stretchers, no more war-cracked voices in her ear. Just the sound of blood dripping onto stone. And Megan's own voice, barely above a whisper. I'm not done. The silence didn't last. Distant artillery rumbled against the ridge like a slow-rolling storm, shaking tiny avalanches of dust loose from the MRAP beside her. Megan blinked hard, forcing her eyes to refocus. She had maybe an hour of lucidity left, less if the bleeding didn't slow. No medics were coming, no evac, no backup, so she did what Navy SEALs do when nobody else shows up. She treated herself. With a grunt, she pushed to her elbows and scanned the kill zone. Smoke drifted over abandoned gear, blown open packs, and the dark silhouettes of vehicles cooked by the first mortars. Closer, 10 feet maybe, was a green medical ruck lying half-buried under debris. She dragged herself toward it on her forearms, teeth clenched, legs screaming every time they brushed the ground. When she finally reached the pack and flipped it open, she exhaled shakily. Quick clot, tourniquet, airway kit, for bags. Not much, but enough. Her hands shook as she unbuttoned her blouse and peeled back the blood-soaked fabric. The wound was ugly. Shrapnel lodged deep beside her navel, the flesh around it slick and pulsing. She didn't have the luxury of hesitation. She scavenged a metal pry tool from the torn ruck frame and held it over a small patch of burning debris until it glowed faintly. Then, jaw locked, breath held. She pressed it beside the wound and used her other hand to work the shrapnel free. White pain detonated across her vision. She bit down on her sleeve and screamed into the dirt to keep from blacking out. The fragment slid free in a ribbon of blood. She tossed it aside, grabbed the quick clot, and packed the wound with brutal efficiency learned across too many deployments. Her fingers were slick. Her breathing went uneven, but she kept moving. Tourniquet next, tightened high on the thigh to slow the secondary bleed. She hissed as it cinched down. Then she tore open an 4-bag with her teeth, stabbed the needle into her own arm, and taped it in place with hands that kept wanting to go numb. Only once the fluid started to drip did she let herself rest her head against the dirt for 30 seconds. Because when she looked down, she noticed blood splatter on her dog tags again. Fresh lines painting over the faint carved trident scar on her chest. The thing the medics never saw. The thing the enemy never should. A slow heat. Not rage, not despair. Something colder began to build behind her ribs. Not because she was wounded, not because she'd been abandoned, but because they had decided she wasn't worth saving. That was a mistake. A branch cracked in the tree line. Footsteps, low voices, not English. Megan wiped her hand across her chest, gripped her sidearm with steadier fingers than she expected, and took a shallow breath. They were coming, and she wasn't dying here. She stayed still, one eye half shut, breath shallow, pistol pressed close to her thigh, barrel tucked against her leg to hide the glint. From the gap beneath the MRAP, she counted 3 sets of boots. Light, deliberate, spaced too evenly for scavengers. Professional. They were sweeping for stragglers, confirming kills. One of them stopped 10 feet from her, speaking softly in another language. She didn't catch the words, but the tone told her everything. Calm, curious, certain. The way someone talks when they've already decided the fight is over. Megan exhaled once and rolled left into the shadow of the wreck. She moved fast, grabbed a broken side mirror from the ground, and used it to peek around the rear tire. 2 visible, one crouched, poking through a torn rucksack. The other was smoking, his rifle dangling loose as he walked toward a fallen soldier's body. The third wasn't in view. She scanned again, there, behind the hood, moving toward the triage tarps, isolated. That was her chance. She slipped around the rear axle, boots silent on the dust, her fingers tightening on the pistol. Her abdomen screamed with each step, but she used the pain to sharpen the edges of her focus. 20 feet. 15. He turned. Too late. She hit him low, shoulder into the gut, knife into the side of his neck as they toppled behind a supply crate. He tried to cry out, but all that came was a wet gurgle as she clamped a hand over his mouth and drove the blade in deeper. One down. She grabbed his rifle and pivoted just as the second one shouted. Too far to aim cleanly, but not too far to shoot. Megan fired once. Center mass. The man folded with a grunt, weapon clattering beside him. The third yelled into his radio and started to run. She fired again, missed wide, cursed and lowered the weapon. She wasn't chasing. Not yet. Instead, she limped to the bodies and stripped them fast. Extra mags, field rations, short-range encrypted radio, one intact recon drone still stowed in its pouch. No maps, no insignias, no dog tags, contractors. One of them had a patch stitched to his vest. Taurus Security. She froze. Recognized the name. Not a friendly outfit. Private military. No accountability. Known for subcontracting cleanup operations in war zones too gray for headlines. And if they were here, that meant someone had called them in to do exactly what they were doing. Erase survivors. She keyed the radio to scan and caught a voice in mid-sentence. Confirmed to Kia. Female target unaccounted for. Then after a pause, they missed one. The woman's still alive. She clicked the radio off. They knew she was here, but now she knew that they weren't militia, weren't locals, weren't accidental threats. They were paid. And she wasn't a survivor. She was a target. She started uphill. No drama. No grand rise from the dust. Just one blood-slicked boot. Then another, grinding into loose soil as she forced her weight onto her good leg and used a splintered rifle stock as a crutch. Every step was earned, every breath a decision. The forest ridge above the kill zone rose like a broken spine. Pine and shale, rock shelves, and sharp inclines meant to slow anything human. Megan climbed it anyway. The drone she'd taken, palm-sized, short-range, nothing fancy, hummed to life in her hand as she reached the edge of the rise. She set it low and sent it forward. Its thermal readout bled static through the screen, but still gave her what she needed. They were sweeping behind her. A 6-man contractor team moving in a disciplined line through the wreckage below. 4 carried rifles, 2 held scanners. They were looking for one body that hadn't bled out. Her. And they weren't the only ones in the valley. To the east, she spotted the tail of the NATO evacuation convoy. The same medics who'd left her behind. The same officers who hadn't asked her name. Their Humvees were slowed, rerouting around collapsed terrain from the earlier shelling. But they were moving straight toward a narrow corridor Megan recognized from satellite briefings. It wasn't marked on the updated maps, which meant no one had told them it had been remined. They were heading into a belt of buried explosives the size of a football field. Her first instinct was cold and fast. Let them walk into it. They'd left her for dead. Hadn't checked, hadn't cared. But then she thought of the private she'd carried. The kid who hadn't even had time to flinch before the blast wave threw his squad into the trees. His helmet had been too big. His arm still wrapped around her shoulder when the medics pulled him off like a sack of gear. He was on that convoy, and if he hit that minefield, he wouldn't be lucky a second time. Her jaw tightened. She veered off the ridge and followed the deer path she'd spotted earlier. Every 100 meters, she had to stop, inject morphine, reapply pressure, catch herself before passing out. But she kept moving downhill now to a crag with a clear line of sight across the next valley. There, beneath the canopy of shattered oak, were the enemy mortar teams, coordinating by flashlight signals. She could see the glint of lenses, hear the metallic clink of rounds being prepped. If she didn't stop them, they'd pin the convoy just as it entered the mine belt, and no one would walk out. She gritted her teeth, pulled out the last of her stolen explosives, and began planning something they wouldn't expect from a wounded woman left to die. She wasn't just going to survive. She was going to finish what her team started. The ridge smelled like diesel and pine needles. Dry branches cracked underfoot somewhere beyond the bluff. But Megan didn't flinch. She was crouched on a shale ledge, belly to stone, eyes on the enemy mortar crews below. 4 teams spaced evenly across a narrow shelf in the valley wall. No rush, no panic, just quiet preparation like they'd done this before. She zoomed the drone lens in. Each crew was coordinated. 2 men handling tubes, 1 acting as spotter, another relaying coordinates by headset. No uniforms, contractor-grade gear, local insignias stripped clean. They didn't look like militia, they looked like a job. And that meant someone had paid for the convoy to be hit on both ends. Megan exhaled slowly and pulled her stolen radio from her vest. She keyed it to the Taurus security channel, mimicking the cadence she'd heard earlier. Mortar 3, reposition south. Firewatch request coming from Ridge Point. A few seconds passed, then a clipped reply, copy. Moving. She repeated it twice more with slight variations. Watch the crews split up, realign, spread thin, divide, and then destroy. She reached into the bottom of the field pack, found a cracked plastic jug of synthetic fuel, and a flare canister someone had dropped in the scramble. She ripped her last field dressing into strips, doused it in fuel, and wrapped it around a tire discarded near the impact crater. With effort, she jammed a wedge of steel beneath one side, a shallow angle. The ridge fell steeply behind it. She lit the makeshift torch and shoved it. It rolled downhill like a wheel from hell, flaming rubber shrieking against stone, straight into the enemy's fuel drums. Then came the blast. A thunderclap against the mountainside. Bright orange swallowed the nearest crew. Men scattered, shouting. 2 tried to save the munitions. 1 bolted into the trees, straight into a mine Megan had marked earlier with stones. The second explosion was smaller, sharper. She didn't wait. She slid down the opposite slope, flanking hard to the east, grabbing the drone controller mid-movement. On screen, she tracked the remaining crews. 1 wounded, 2 in full retreat, 1 frozen in place, broadcasting frantic calls that no one was answering. Megan found cover in a crevice and keyed the enemy net again. Voice neutral. Grid 5 Bravo compromised. Friendly fire suspected. All crews shift to fall back. She didn't need them to obey. She just needed confusion. Then she scanned the forest floor and saw what she hadn't wanted to find. The NATO convoy crawling forward again. Unaware they were drifting off course, straight toward the old mine belt. Her eyes locked on the lead Humvee. She recognized the number stenciled on the hood, the same vehicle they'd loaded that private into. Her jaw tightened. Mission first, always. And now that mission was making sure those men didn't die just because she was left behind. She raised the radio to her lips and didn't speak right away. Below her, the NATO convoy was grinding to a halt. 6 Humvees and 2 troop carriers fanned out across the valley's narrowest curve. Engines idled, tires sunk in soft earth, and a few soldiers had stepped out, checking maps, waving their arms, confused. They were already in it. The mine belt wasn't marked. It hadn't been for years. The most recent maps, the ones the logistics captain clutched in his hands right now, showed a clean corridor. But the locals knew. The insurgents knew. Megan had seen it herself on recon 4 days ago. A cluster of old skull and crossbone signs buried under rockfall. Discarded warning flags stuffed into a log pile. She keyed the recon radio she'd taken from the contractors. The frequency was one only command-level personnel used. Her voice was hoarse but steady. Convoy Bravo 2, halt movement. You are in a live minefield. Repeat. Stop all forward movement now. A pause. Static. Then unverified transmission. Identify yourself. Brooks. Petty Officer First Class. SEAL Team 4. Clearance code Echo Zulu 6. Silence again. Long enough to worry she wasn't being heard. Then a different voice. Older. Familiar. The logistics captain. Is this the woman we left behind? She didn't bother with preamble. Yes. And I'm the only one who knows how to get you out of this alive. Another pause. Someone covered the mic, muffled a conversation. She imagined the disbelief, the backpedaling, the stammering half-apologies behind closed vehicle doors. Then the captain came back on, cautious. You're injured. We were told you didn't make it. You didn't ask. Now listen carefully. Still no confirmation. So she gave them what they needed. Lead vehicle, stop moving. Your front left tire is 6 inches from a directional anti-personnel mine. Rear axle in soft soil. Don't shift weight. You'll trigger the plate. That got their attention. Another medic keyed in, voice tight. How the hell do you know that? Because I saw the grid 8 days ago and I have your movement path on drone feed right now. Stillness fell over the net. She imagined heads turning, radios being passed around. And then the moment. A younger medic, breath short, almost afraid. Sir, I have helmet cam footage from that private. The one she pulled out. You need to see this. Click. Muffled playback. Then, oh God. Then, look at her chest. That scar. Look at the ink. A medic, barely audible across the comms. She's got the trident. She's a SEAL. The silence turned reverent. Megan didn't wait for apologies. Move the lead vehicle 2 meters left, then follow my marks. No one deviates. No one questioned her this time, not even the captain. She guided them forward, meter by meter, clearing a path with coordinates only a trained EOD operator could have memorized under fire. And all the while, she kept one eye on the ridge behind her. Because while the medics were realizing who she was, the enemy had already found her position. The first shot rang out before she could respond. It whistled past her shoulder and slammed into the dirt inches from the drone controller. She didn't flinch. She already knew they were coming. Megan dropped low, swept the gear into a ditch, and crawled back into the cluster of rocks she'd chosen hours earlier. A natural outcrop, high-angle, narrow approach. She'd fortified it with what little she'd had. A trip wire from the contractor's vest, 2 audio baits rigged with her last smoke canisters, and a scattering of loose rocks she'd memorized like pressure plates. Now they were all she had. She pressed her back to the ridge wall and heard the voices, half-shouted, half-silent. Climbing. For maybe 5 sets of boots. No staggered spacing this time. They were rushing, trying to overrun a wounded woman before she could dig in. Megan smiled. She was already dug in. The trip wire snapped. Smoke erupted from the lower slope, curling white and thick, drifting with the wind downhill. Exactly as planned. The illusion worked. From below, it looked like she was repositioning, like the ridge was losing her cover. A shout. She's falling back. 2 figures broke through the lower pines. She counted the steps. 1, 2, 3, pop. Flashbang rigged behind a rock snapped hard. Disoriented, one man staggered. She dropped him with a single round to the chest. His partner spun too late. She was already rolling left, using the boulders for cover, circling to flank. The third came from above, clever enough to try a high crawl. But she had set a mine, not lethal but loud, under the gravel shelf. He triggered it. The blast wasn't enough to kill, but the noise stunned him. That was all she needed. 1 round to the neck. Down. She reloaded. 2 mags left. Her fingers worked by feel. Her ears filtered for movement through the smoke. She moved again, slower now. 1 leg trailing blood. She couldn't sprint, couldn't leap, but she didn't need to. They still thought she was trying to escape. She was still leading them. Another voice cut through on the open convoy frequency. Panicked. The logistics captain. Brooks, we hear shooting. Are you under attack? Do you need support? She keyed her mic without hesitation. No, you won't reach me in time. Tell us where you are. We can reroute a fire team. She didn't shout, didn't raise her voice. I said no. You've got wounded to protect. I'll hold the ridge. Someone else came on. One of the medics' younger voice, shaking. Ma'am, you'll die up there. Megan leaned into her rifle, peering through the scope at the 4th target emerging from the left side. Weapon ready. Then I'll die on my feet. 1 clean shot. Target down. She exhaled. 1 magazine left and no more illusions. It went quiet again. Not the kind of quiet that meant safety. Megan knew that kind didn't exist anymore, but the kind that warned of something smarter coming. Smoke drifted like fog off the rocks. Spent shell casings shimmered in the dust. Her hands were slick with sweat and dried blood, but her grip on the rifle was steady. 1 mag, 5 rounds. That would have to be enough. Then she heard it. 1 set of boots, deliberate and slow, crunching stone just beyond her flank. No chatter, no panic. Someone alone, someone trained, not rushing, not afraid. She stayed low, adjusted her sight line, and waited. A voice came from just beyond the ledge. Calm, confident. Petty Officer Brooks. I was told you were a problem. Megan didn't reply. I can see that was an understatement. She caught a glimpse. Black boots, clean tactical pants, knee guards, gloves. The man stepped fully into view, rifle down but ready. He wore no insignia. His face was lined, shaved close, and far too calm for someone stepping onto a ridge filled with his own dead. You're not militia, she said flatly. He smirked. Neither are you. They circled slowly, a loose half-moon, dust and distance between them. Megan's limbs screamed with every shift in stance, but she forced herself to keep her breathing measured. You're Taurus? She asked. Not anymore. Private contractor. Client lists above your pay grade. Who sold our convoy route? He tilted his head. Does it matter? She didn't answer. She dropped her empty sidearm and raised the rifle with both hands. The moment he moved, she fired. Hit the vest. Center mass. The force staggered him, but he recovered too fast. He was on her in seconds. They hit the ground hard. Her ribs lit up with pain as her back slammed into rock. His elbow drove toward her throat. She deflected with her forearm and reached for her knife. He knocked it away. They struggled close, filthy, the fight of two people who knew exactly how to kill and how not to die. He pressed down, trying to choke her against the ridge wall. She let him just long enough to get her legs into position. Then she twisted sideways, rolled, and sent both of them tumbling through the gravel. He hit first. She came down on top of him with a rock in her hand. The first strike cracked his temple. The second ended it for a long moment. She just knelt there, hand trembling, chest heaving. Then she leaned close, checked his neck, and pulled a small encrypted drive from the pouch under his vest. There were names on this drive, coordinates, payouts, proof, and the last thing he'd said before trying to crush her windpipe. Your convoy was never supposed to make it out. She stared at his body, then keyed her mic. I'm coming down, she said, voice raw. Prepare for wounded. The slope down from the ridge felt longer than it had climbing up. Her legs barely held under her weight. Blood soaked through her bandage again, warm against her side. The rifle dragged at her shoulder, the drive in her fist pressing into her palm like it wanted to punch through. She didn't call ahead again. No warnings, no requests. They saw her before she spoke. The convoy had stopped in a clearing near a burnt-out barn. Perimeter loosely secured by what was left of the escort team. Stretchers lined the far edge. Medics clustered in twos and threes, murmuring into radios, faces pale, silent. Then someone pointed. She's coming down. Boots turned, weapons lowered. Megan stepped into the clearing, smeared in blood, caked in dust, one eye swollen, vest torn open. The trident scar on her chest was visible now. Nobody missed it this time. The same logistics captain who dismissed her hours ago took one slow step forward, helmet in hand. Brooks, his voice caught. We didn't know. We should have. She didn't let him finish. You didn't ask. He looked down, nodded once. No argument, no defense. A medic moved toward her, holding a stretcher. She stopped him with a glance. I'm upright. Give that to someone who's not. She passed them without another word, straight to the private she'd carried at the beginning. He was lying on his side, arm in a sling, chest wrapped tight, conscious, eyes wide. He blinked when she knelt beside him. You made it, he whispered. Yeah, she said. You too. That was all. Behind her, the distant thump of rotors began to build. Quick reaction force inbound. A dozen boots thundered across the perimeter. Officers in clean gear stepped forward, demanding sit reps, threat assessments, kill counts. Who neutralized the ridge? One asked. The medic didn't point. He just said quietly, she did. Alone. Megan turned away from them all, walked to the back of a Humvee, and sat down on the tailgate. Let her body finally settle. Let the pain finally catch up. But she stayed upright. When the QRF commander approached and offered her bottled water, she didn't take it. Instead, she handed him the encrypted drive. Names, payments, kill order trail. Someone sold our route. It's all there. He stared at it like it was made of fire, then took it without a word. The helicopters descended with dust and force and too much noise. They tried to load her first. She waved them off. One of the last stretchers belonged to a corporal missing half a foot. Megan helped lift him inside. Only then did she board, gripping the side rail with a blood-stained hand. As the bird rose, she didn't look back. There was only one rule she never broke. Leave no one behind, even if they tried to leave her. Would you have kept fighting if everyone left you to die? Did the medics fail, Megan? Or were they just following protocol? Drop your answers in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story reminded you that the most dangerous person on the field is the one you abandoned, then hit that like button, subscribe, turn on the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. Share this video with someone who still believes in second chances. And if you're not ready to leave yet, watch the next mission appearing on your screen right now, because I'll be back same time tomorrow with another story they don't want you to hear.